She moved through the polished marble floor of the high-rise Seoul restaurant like a shadow, unnoticed, precise. Amina Sefiu, tall and poised, carried the air of someone who had learned early that invisibility was protection. Her hands were steady, her smile practiced, yet behind the calm exterior, a storm quietly raged, a storm formed by years of running, of leaving fragments of herself scattered across continents. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with the usual chatter of business elites, yet Amina's attention never wavered. The bell above the door rang, slicing through the ambient murmur. A man entered, a figure sharp, deliberate, commanding the room without a single word. His gaze swept across the tables, lingering, piercing. Most would have assumed he was just another wealthy patron, another fleeting presence. But Amina felt it, a subtle weight pressing at the edges of memory she had long buried. He approached the hostess with an air of quiet authority. Amina observed, noting the small details, the crease of his tailored suit, the faint calluses on his hands, the way his eyes darted as if searching, scanning for something or someone. There was something familiar in that measured stare, a rhythm she couldn't place. And yet, she treated him like every other guest. Polite, distant, unremarkable. Dean, the man she had never known would haunt her life, held himself like someone who had learned patience over years of searching. Every subtle gesture, every carefully measured breath was proof of purpose. He did not recognize the danger he might awaken. Or perhaps he did, and yet he chose to press forward anyway, like someone drawn by gravity toward hidden truth. For Amina, this night was just another shift, another cycle of plates, wine, and polite smiles. For Dean, it was the culmination of a relentless pursuit. He had chased rumors, hints, whispers of a name he could barely remember, lost in the alleys of distant cities, lost in crowded streets, in faces that were almost hers but never exactly. And now here she was, standing a few feet away, serving strangers, yet unknowingly holding the power to undo years of longing. The tension between them hummed invisibly, like a string pulled taut. Neither spoke, yet the air vibrated with recognition unspoken. The restaurant around them faded into insignificance, shadows and candlelight framing a moment that neither could yet name. As Amina carried the next tray of glasses, she caught his gaze just long enough to feel the prickle of familiarity, like remembering a dream she had fought to forget. But before she could place it, he smiled ever so faintly, and the faintest spark of recognition crossed his eyes. Something in that look made her stomach drop. And then he spoke, softly, almost a whisper meant only for her, though the restaurant thrummed around them. "You don't remember me yet." The words were light, almost casual, but they carried a weight that would change everything. "You don't remember me yet." The words lingered, unspoken by anyone else but vibrating through Amina's chest. She froze mid-step, tray poised in her hands, her pulse suddenly loud enough she feared it might betray her. The face before her, the calm, piercing gaze of the stranger, seemed to stretch across the room, erasing everything else. She did not know him. She should not know him. And yet, something deep in the marrow of her memory stirred. A shadow of a night, a fleeting conversation, a laugh shared in a city far away, years ago. Amina swallowed the moment, forcing herself into the motions of professionalism. Plates clinked against the polished wood, and the ambient chatter resumed, but she felt the invisible thread connecting them tighten with every heartbeat. She glanced down, hoping to dismiss the feeling, but the connection was undeniable, as if the universe itself had arranged this encounter, and she was too cautious to see it coming. From his table, Dean did not move. He watched her as if studying the pattern of her life, cataloging the smallest gestures, the tilt of her head, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted briefly toward the exit. He had spent years learning the language of her silence, tracing every rumor, every lead across continents. And now, in this quiet Seoul restaurant, he observed the woman he had lost, now moving among strangers, unknowingly powerful in her simplicity. Every measured breath he took was a calculation, every glance an attempt to coax recognition without forcing it. He had learned patience in the hardest ways, waiting, searching, enduring. To him, Amina was not a stranger, though to her, he remained the faintest echo of uncertainty. Amina moved through the floor, serving guests, concealing the rush of unease. She prided herself on her self-control. Yet tonight, that control felt like it might fracture. Memories she had buried began pressing at the edges of her mind. The way someone had once called her by a name she no longer used, the feeling of safety in the presence of a stranger who had vanished just as suddenly as he appeared. She tried to dismiss it, reminding herself she had survived without him, that she had built a life on forgetting. But instinct told her there was more, something unresolved, something dangerous in its clarity. Dian's eyes followed her, calm but unrelenting, as though the mere act of watching could bridge the years between them. The quiet tension between them grew like a storm gathering at the horizon, inevitable, unstoppable, threatening to break everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. When Amina returned to refill a glass, a folded note was left under the guest check at Dian's table. She hesitated, glancing around. The restaurant was full, the night ordinary, but the handwriting was familiar in a way that set her heart pounding. Slowly, deliberately, she unfolded it. The single line scrawled in neat black ink made her blood run cold. "I've been searching for you for years, and tonight I will not leave without answers." Her hands trembled. Something in her told her that this was no ordinary stranger. Something told her that every carefully constructed wall she had built was about to collapse, and she wasn't sure she was ready. Amina held the note between her fingers as though it might burn her. The black ink stared back like a shadow from the past she had tried to erase. "I've been searching for you for years, and tonight I will not leave without answers." Each word struck with the weight of inevitability, a truth she wasn't ready to face. Her pulse raced, her mind grappling with the familiarity in the handwriting, an echo she could almost place but could not fully grasp. The restaurant's soft hum faded around her. Patrons laughed, glasses clinked, waiters moved in practiced steps. But Amina felt suspended, caught in a web that stretched years back, spanning continents and leading here. She knew one thing. This stranger, this man whose eyes had pinned her in place all evening, was no ordinary guest. Dian watched her from across the table, calm yet intense. His hand rested lightly on the edge, fingers tapping a slow rhythm only he could hear. He had spent years memorizing every clue, every rumor, every fleeting mention of her name. Tonight, the patience he had honed like a blade was tested not by her silence, but by her proximity, the way she moved with strength and grace, unaware of the storm she stirred. Something in her hesitated as she unfolded the note, a micro-expression flickering across her face that almost betrayed recognition. And for a brief heartbeat, Dian's chest tightened, not from frustration, but from the pain of waiting, of knowing she could sense him but not yet remember. The almost reveal danced on the edge of possibility, teasing them both, threatening to ignite what had been dormant for years. Amina tried to focus on her work, to anchor herself in the present. Yet fragments of memory pressed through. A cafe in Casablanca, laughter spilling across a rain-drenched evening, hands brushing in the dark, a promise she had forgotten. The more she tried to suppress it, the more insistent the memories became, like waves against a cliff she had thought unshakable. Dian's presence was a mirror she couldn't look away from. In him, she saw a reflection of what she had lost, what she had feared, and what she might still reclaim. The almost recognition was a knife's edge, sharp enough to cut the illusions she had built, but not yet enough to reveal the truth. Each second stretched into eternity, leaving her wondering, was this coincidence, fate, or something more dangerous altogether? She returned to his table, trying to place the man in her fragmented memory. He offered her a faint, enigmatic smile, as though acknowledging her hesitation without words. The note trembled in her hand, heavy with implication. And then, before she could slip it back into her apron pocket, he spoke, low, deliberate, impossibly close to her ear. "You don't remember me yet, but tonight you will." A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it was a promise that the world she had meticulously rebuilt for herself was about to collide with a past she thought she had left behind. And Amina knew, somewhere deep down, that she wasn't ready, but she had no choice. "You don't remember me yet, but tonight you will." The words lingered in Amina's mind as she moved away, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to appear composed. Each step felt heavier, as if the room itself resisted her motion. She tried to anchor herself in routine. Glasses to refill, orders to deliver, but the air between her and the stranger had shifted. The calm, invisible boundary she had carefully maintained around herself no longer existed. He was here, and he was patient. Dean did not follow, not yet. He remained seated, letting her retreat into her practiced motions, studying her with the quiet intensity of someone who had hunted a ghost for years. He was acutely aware of the power imbalance in the room. Him, a billionaire CEO accustomed to command. Her, a woman blending into the background. And yet, somehow, the balance was shifting, subtly, irresistibly. Amina approached a table where a high-profile client demanded more than courtesy. The man's tone was sharp, dismissive, a subtle assertion of power meant to remind everyone of their place. Most would have flinched, but Amina's eyes hardened. She met his gaze, evenly refusing to bow. Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable steel beneath it. Dean watched from across the room as she diffused the tension with nothing more than poise and intelligence. The room had expected a servant. Instead, they encountered a woman commanding respect without raising her voice. The social order they took for granted faltered under her quiet dominance. In that moment, Dean realized that he had not only found her, but also discovered that she had grown stronger than he could have imagined. The invisible threads between them were taut with recognition and unspoken questions. Amina had not known she was being watched so closely, and yet every gesture, every decision, revealed layers of her resilience. Dean's fascination deepened, not just for the woman he had been searching for, but for the force she had become. He realized that she might not need saving. She might need a partner strong enough to match her. For Amina, the encounter was a paradox. She was unsettled by the man she could not yet place, yet invigorated by the small victories that reminded her she was not powerless. Her independence, her strength, her carefully constructed barriers, all were being tested without a single word exchanged between them. The restaurant's noise faded as Dean finally rose, moving toward the exit with measured steps. Amina's gaze followed him instinctively, her chest tightening. Just as he reached the door, a familiar accessory, a thin gold chain she remembered from another life, peeked from beneath his collar. Recognition threatened to break through her defenses. She took a step forward, compelled to speak, to question, to confront. But before she could, he stopped, turned just enough to allow a shadowed smile, and whispered over his shoulder, "Soon, you'll remember everything, and nothing will ever be the same." The words were both promise and warning, and Amina felt the ground shift beneath her. Something in her whispered that her life, carefully guarded until now, was about to unravel. "Soon, you'll remember everything, and nothing will ever be the same." The words haunted Amina long after Dean disappeared into the night. Her hands shook as she returned to her small apartment, the familiar walls suddenly feeling like a cage. Each shadow seemed to whisper fragments of a past she had spent years trying to bury. And yet, tonight, something had shifted. The careful mask she wore, the one that kept the world at arm's length, felt dangerously thin. A news alert blinked on her phone, an innocuous notification she would normally ignore. But tonight it demanded attention. A headline in bold letters. Corporate scandal exposed by former activist. Anonymous tip reveals high-level corruption in global firms. Amina froze. Her stomach dropped. She had assumed her past was buried in distant lands, her identity safe, hidden, untouchable. Yet here it was, leaking into the world she had built. Memories she had fought to forget surged. Late nights in candlelit apartments, the quiet exhilaration of defying power, the face of a stranger who had once believed in her vision. The words of that night, the laughter, the fleeting handhold. Every fragment returned with a pulse that made her chest ache. And somewhere beneath it all, she sensed Dian's eyes on her, observing, calculating, recognizing truths she was still too afraid to face. It was then she understood. He had not come merely as a stranger or guest. He had come as a seeker, a witness, a man who knew more about her than she dared admit to herself. And she realized with a flicker of unease that the universe, or perhaps fate itself, was drawing their lives together once more, whether she wanted it or not. Amina paced, her thoughts a labyrinth of fear and defiance. Her identity was no longer secret. The world had glimpsed her history, her courage, and her recklessness. The people she had once trusted could now betray her, and the man who had haunted her every shadow might either protect her or become the greatest threat she had ever known. She thought of Dian, the calm, precise observer, and a pang of doubt twisted in her chest. How much did he truly know? Had he found her because of the news, or had he always known? Waiting patiently for the night their paths would inevitably cross? The distinction made little difference. The walls she had built were cracking, and she could feel them giving way under the weight of his presence, his knowledge, his unwavering pursuit. The apartment was silent, but her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. The screen illuminated a single sentence. "I know who you are, and I've always been looking for you." Amina's breath caught in her throat. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched the device, torn between fear and the undeniable pull of curiosity. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to retreat, to preserve the life she had fought to reclaim. But another part, deeper, more dangerous, urged her forward. And somewhere in the quiet of the night a shadow waited, knowing that the next step she took could change everything she thought she knew about herself, her past, and the man who had haunted her dreams for years. Amina stared at the message on her phone. The words burned into her vision. "I know who you are, and I've always been looking for you." Every fiber of her being urged her to delete it, to retreat into the walls she had spent years building. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of recognition flickered. Someone else knew her story, someone who understood the past she thought buried. A soft knock on her apartment door jolted her from the spiral of thoughts. Cautious, she approached, heart racing, every muscle tensed. She peeked through the peephole. Standing there was a familiar face, not Dian, but someone from her past in Casablanca, someone who had once been her closest confidant and now bore news she could neither ignore nor fully trust. The door creaked open, revealing Amara, her old friend and ally, whose presence alone carried the weight of shared secrets. Amara's eyes were sharp, scanning the room as though it held dangers invisible to the ordinary eye. "Amina," she said softly, "you're being watched. He's not alone in this. And the truth, it's closer than you think." Amina's chest tightened. Questions collided with panic and curiosity. How much did Amara know? Was she here to protect her, or to warn her about what was coming? Every instinct told Amina to retreat, yet the memory of their shared past, the nights spent planning, hiding, surviving, pulled her forward. She knew that Amara would never intervene without purpose. Amara laid out the news in fragments. Hints of powerful interests circling around Dian, whispers of corporate espionage, and rumors of people who had tracked Amina across continents, unsure whether to protect her or exploit her influence. Each revelation chipped away at Amina's sense of safety, reminding her that the life she had built in Seoul was more fragile than she had imagined. The tension between them was sharp and immediate. Amina wanted to dismiss the warnings, to cling to control, but the urgency in Amara's tone left no room for denial. She realized that Dian's presence and the obsession that had brought him here was not the only threat. Shadows from her past had followed her, waiting for a moment to strike, to expose, to challenge everything she thought she had escaped. Amara reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table. "This came for you today," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's from someone who wants you to remember. And it's not Dian." Amina hesitated, staring at the envelope as if it were a living thing. Her fingers brushed the seal, trembling, hesitant to break it, yet drawn irresistibly forward. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though holding its breath for what was about to be revealed. She knew the moment she opened it, her carefully constructed world would shift again, perhaps irreversibly. Her pulse thundered as she broke the seal. Inside, a single photograph slipped out, worn at the edges, showing a moment from her past she had thought vanished forever. A younger Amina, laughing, hand in hand with someone she had long tried to forget. Behind the image, scribbled in precise handwriting, were the words, "Remember who you are, Amina. Everything depends on it, and he is only the beginning." Her breath caught. Questions erupted inside her, each one heavier than the last. Who had sent this? How did they know her story? And what did Dian truly want with her? The photograph burned in Amina's mind, its edges sharp against the blurred memories she had tried to forget. She could not escape the feeling that someone was orchestrating the pieces around her, manipulating forces she could barely see. And tonight, the world she had built in Seoul, careful, isolated, self-contained, was about to collide with the reach of Dian's world, and the family he could not escape. Dian's family was legendary in power and influence, and their legacy was cold and unyielding. His father, a man whose expectations could crush empires, had been subtly observing Amina from afar. He knew of her activism, of her past disruptions in global corporations. For him, she was more than a threat. She was a challenge to the image of control he had spent decades cultivating. Amina had been cautious, believing her anonymity would protect her. Yet tonight, the walls seemed thinner than ever. A well-placed tip, a whispered warning, and she realized that the shadows she thought were distant had crept close. Her allies were few, her options constrained, and even Dian's intentions now felt like a riddle she might never solve. The tension was subtle but palpable. A dinner invitation arrived, elegant and insistent, sent not by Dian but by someone else in his family. It carried both politeness and menace. The message was clear: appear, explain yourself, or be assumed dangerous. Amina's instincts screamed to refuse, but the lure of understanding the man who had haunted her every memory pulled her toward it, despite every warning. She arrived at the family estate, its marble floors gleaming under chandeliers that seemed to mock her simplicity. A distant cousin intercepted her at the entrance, with a look that spoke of suspicion and subtle contempt. "We know who you are," he said, voice low, almost cordial. "But we don't trust you. Not fully." Amina's jaw tightened. She realized in that moment that Dian's world, rich, calculated, unforgiving, had no place for innocence or patience. Every gesture, every word from the family was a test, and she had been thrust into a court of judgment before she could even explain herself. Meanwhile, Dian waited in a quiet chamber, hidden from view, observing the interaction like a shadow tethered to his own secrets. He understood both her strength and her vulnerability. He had seen her defend herself in crowded streets, in distant cities, against those who underestimated her. And yet, seeing her face the subtle hostility of his family, a quiet anger burned within him. The stakes had risen beyond recognition. Not just love, but loyalty, trust, and survival were on the line. Amina felt the weight of the room pressing down, each polite glance a potential threat. She realized the family did not simply want to test her. They wanted to measure the extent of her past, her connections, and perhaps her influence over Dian. And she knew, in the pit of her stomach, that failure here could change everything. Just as she gathered the courage to speak, a voice rang from the shadows, soft but unmistakable. "Amina, you've come further than I imagined. But do you truly know what you're stepping into?" She froze. The voice was familiar, yet it carried a weight she could not place. From the corner of the grand hall, a figure emerged, a stranger to her, yet somehow intimately connected to her past. A chill ran down her spine, and in that moment, the walls she had carefully built, the independence she had claimed, and the trust she had begun to extend to Dean, all threatened to crumble beneath the revelation she could feel coming. The next step she took would decide whether she survived the night or became trapped in a web that stretched far beyond her understanding. Amina, you've come further than I imagined. But do you truly know what you're stepping into? The voice echoed through the grand hall like a warning stitched with curiosity and menace. Amina's breath caught, and for the first time, the air itself seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. She scanned the shadows, her pulse hammering in her ears. Who had spoken? A stranger, yet the timbre carried an intimate knowledge, a past intertwined with hers. Before she could respond, a figure stepped forward from the dim corner. The faint candlelight revealed features she should have recognized but could not fully place. Her stomach dropped as fragments of memory collided. The laughter, the rain-drenched streets of Casablanca, the stolen promises whispered in nights that were long gone but never forgotten. Suddenly, Dean appeared beside her, moving like a shadow tethered to her fate. "It's me," he whispered, low enough for only her to hear, yet sharp as a blade against the silence. "All this time, I have been searching, not to punish, not to test, but to find you and protect you." Amina froze. The walls she had built around her heart shuddered under the weight of recognition. Years of longing, of chasing shadows across cities and continents, were now concentrated in this single moment. She wanted to recoil, to deny, to retreat, but her heart betrayed her with every beat. Dean's eyes, steady and unwavering, held not judgment but an intensity that demanded truth, demanded surrender, demanded acknowledgement of the bond neither of them had truly forgotten. Her phone buzzed again, a subtle but insistent vibration that broke the fragile moment. A message from the stranger in the shadows. "He is not who you think. You are both being watched." Amina's pulse thundered in her chest. Dean's expression tightened, just slightly, as if the revelation stung him too. She realized the truth. Everything she had believed, that Dean had come alone, that their reunion was simply fate, was only part of a larger, far more dangerous puzzle. Someone else, a hidden observer, had orchestrated this collision of lives, ensuring every step, every choice, every whispered word had consequences beyond comprehension. And in that instant, the past and present collided. The life she had painstakingly reconstructed, the walls she had built for safety, the courage she had cultivated, they were all now fragile in the face of a truth she could not yet fully grasp. Dean reached for her hand, tentative, yet commanding in its gentleness. The touch was a lifeline, grounding her in the chaos, a tether connecting their shared past to this precarious present. The room seemed to pause, suspended between what was and what could be. Amina felt herself release the fear, if only for a heartbeat, allowing the memory of their time together, stolen, fleeting, unforgettable, to wash over her. Tears threatened unbidden, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel everything she had suppressed. Longing, anger, fear, love. The room, the family, the hidden threats, all faded into the background as the enormity of recognition struck her. She knew, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that she could not run from him anymore, nor from herself. But just as the moment of catharsis began to settle, a sharp sound, a metallic click, like a safety being disengaged, echoed from the entrance. Every nerve in her body screamed alert. Dean's eyes narrowed. "We're not alone," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of command and warning. Amina turned toward the sound, heart hammering, and glimpsed a figure stepping into the doorway. A silhouette she didn't recognize, yet the aura was unmistakably dangerous. The realization hit her like ice. Their reunion, their fragile release, had been manipulated. Someone had planned for them to meet tonight, and the true danger had only just arrived. The room went silent, the tension a living, breathing thing. And in that silence, Amina understood. Nothing would ever be the same. The metallic click echoed through the grand hall like a prelude to chaos. Amina's heart raced, every muscle taut with instinct. Shadows stretched across the walls, hiding figures whose intentions she could only guess. She barely had time to register the danger before Dian moved, fluid and precise, positioning himself between her and the unseen threat. "You're not leaving here alone," he said, his voice low, unwavering. For the first time that night, his authority cut through the tension like a blade, and the room seemed to shift around him. Amina's fear was still raw, but there was a thread of trust weaving between them, a fragile, potent acknowledgement that they could face this together. From the corners of the estate, additional figures emerged. Amara, steadfast and vigilant, flanked Amina, her presence a shield forged from years of shared history. Together, they became a small but formidable force, eyes scanning for threats, every movement calculated. The intruders hesitated, clearly unprepared for resistance. Dian's gaze hardened, and a subtle nod from him was enough to trigger the plan he had been orchestrating silently for years. The room, once dominated by intimidation and hierarchy, now became a battlefield of wits, courage, and strategic precision. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "You thought I would be helpless," she said, meeting the eyes of the closest assailant. "But I've survived cities you couldn't imagine. I've fought when no one would stand with me, and I will not step aside now." In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in her. Years of fear, of hiding, of careful evasion, crystallized into purpose. The power she had cultivated quietly over the years surged to the surface, illuminating her presence, her intellect, her determination. Even Dian, who had watched her grow from afar, felt a surge of awe and pride. The intruders advanced, but they were methodical, slow, cautious. Every footstep was calculated, every gesture betraying uncertainty. Dian moved with her side, guiding and protecting, yet allowing her space to act, to assert her own power. Together, they became a singular force, a balance of experience, intellect, and courage. Amara intercepted one assailant, disarming him with subtle efficiency, while Amina's commanding presence unsettled another. Every movement, every decision was a dance of survival and strategy. In this room, authority was no longer dictated by wealth or lineage. It was earned in real time, and Amina, once a quiet observer of life, now dictated the terms. As the intruders faltered, Dian allowed a rare vulnerability to show. "We've been hunted, yes," he said quietly, "but together, we're stronger than anything they can throw at us." Amina met his gaze, feeling the weight of every year of searching, every moment of longing, every shadow of doubt dissipate. Redemption was not just his, it was theirs. For Dian, it was the fulfillment of a search that had spanned continents. For Amina, it was the realization that she could reclaim her past and future simultaneously, without fear, without apology. Their bond, forged through years of separation, trials, and misunderstanding, now emerged in full, luminous force. But just as relief began to settle, the faint hum of a phone alert cut through the quiet. Amina's hand went to her pocket. A single message flashed across the screen, chilling in its simplicity. "You may have survived tonight, but the real game has only just begun." Her eyes met Dian's. Neither had expected this, but both knew instinctively that their battles were far from over. A new threat, deeper and more insidious than the one they had just faced, waited beyond the walls, unseen but watching. The night's triumph was fleeting, and the realization sank in. The redemption they had fought for was only the beginning of a far greater challenge. The message burned in Amina's mind. "You may have survived tonight, but the real game has only just begun." Her fingers tightened around her phone, pulse still racing from the night's confrontation. Yet, beneath the lingering fear, a quiet determination had taken root. She was no longer the woman who ran from shadows or hid in plain sight. Tonight, she would face whatever remained alongside Dian without hesitation. Dian's hand found hers across the room, steadying, grounding. His gaze met hers, not with expectation, but with unwavering solidarity. Together, they had survived threats, family scrutiny, and secrets that stretched across continents. Tonight, they would confront the last pieces of the puzzle. The faint click of a door announced the arrival of the unseen adversary hinted at in the message. Amina and Dian moved in tandem, instinct and trust guiding every step. The figure emerged, a shadowy architect of chaos, someone who had manipulated their reunion, the threats and the messages. "You've been careful, I'll give you that," the figure said, voice smooth but laced with menace. "But the game isn't over until I say it is." Amina straightened, meeting the gaze without flinching. "Your game ends now," she said. Each word carried the strength of every obstacle she had overcome. The years of survival, the pain of separation, the resilience of a life built on purpose. Dian moved beside her, a silent promise of support, and together they became an unbroken line of determination, ready to reclaim control over their lives. The confrontation unraveled quickly. Secrets were exposed, hidden motives revealed, and the architect of manipulation cornered by evidence, strategy, and the unity of Amina and Dian. Every lie fell away like dust, leaving only clarity. Amina realized that true power was not in wealth or influence. It was in truth, courage, and the willingness to stand unwavering in the face of danger. Dian's eyes softened as he watched her, admiration and love mingling with the relief of finally seeing justice unfold. Their hands stayed intertwined, a tangible reminder of the journey they had survived together. The adversary, stripped of leverage, was escorted from the estate, leaving behind a quiet that felt like both relief and finality. Amina allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time in days. The weight of fear, uncertainty, and longing lifted, replaced by a warmth she had thought reserved for fleeting memories. Dian leaned closer, their foreheads touching, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had endured. "Together," he whispered, and she nodded, the word seal on their journey. Love, recognition, and redemption intertwined. The storm of the past had passed, leaving a horizon wide and unbroken, ready for the lives they would build, side by side. Yet, as the night deepened and the estate lights dimmed, Amina's phone buzzed once more. A new message appeared, brief and signed, but unmistakably deliberate. "You've won this battle, but someone is still watching, and they're closer than you think." Her eyes met Dian's. For the first time since their reunion, a shadow of uncertainty flickered between them. The danger was not gone, it had merely shifted, waiting for the moment to test them again. And in that instant, Amina realized their story was far from over.